The topic is the reunification of the South after the war, and of course we're talking to Dr. RMitchll3, a professor of history and chairman of the department at Fisk University. And of course, Dr. Mitchell, let's give you an opportunity during this last segment to sort of wrap up some of the things dealing with African-American voting and African-American political participation. I think you've already given us his entrance into politics shortly after the war and the impact that he had on politics, but let's expand that and talk about his removal and some of those things that are associated with it.
While those Union soldiers in the South, they protect the black voter. They may not protect him personally, but they keep the polls open. They make sure that people can vote. The South is frustrated. The South has lost the Civil War. The great dream that the South had been built on was the dream of large plantation ownership and having slaves, and now that dream is gone. I can't appreciate, or I can't support it, but I can understand what happened. So also the South has lost white majority rule, white voter rule, not majority, but white rule. We see certain emotional activities. In North Carolina, we see the regulator movement. We see the Knights of the White Communion. In Tennessee, we see the Ku Klux Klan. Again, these are organizations built upon frustration. And to vent that frustration, they use intimidation. One of their targets were black voters, encouraging black people not to vote. The troops encounter the Klan, but on the national level, that same frustration is being looked at. Economically, it's costing the North to keep those troops in the South. It's a period of national disunion. Eventually, a political deal is struck. The politicians, North and South, get together, and they decide that in order to rebuild the South, to discontinue that cost, that federal troops will be removed. Once federal troops are removed, and once states are allowed back in, we see a number of precocious acts, of uncertain acts. We see the application of poll taxes. We see the application of literacy testing. All of this is to disenfranchise. So all of the gains made by the Civil War, the voting rights gains, are lost for African Americans. Consequently, when the African American can't vote, his representatives can't vote. Well, his representatives are removed. With the representatives removed from government, local and state, who is to protect the vested interests of the former slave? Who is to protect the vested interests of the underclass? The South, after the Civil War, needed an underclass. They needed someone to work the plantations. They needed someone to sharecrop. They needed to make sure that the African American didn't all flee outside of the South. So we see a number of actions that weren't just outright racism. They were also political and economic acts carried on by a South with no protection for the African American.
Sometimes with the state legislatures involved.
Exactly, exactly, because the same persons who control the legislatures were those who control the Southern economy, were the large landholders. So we see precocious laws developed, reinstituting a system just as harsh, if not harsher, than slavery. Certainly the experience of the African American in the South after the Civil War and in the United States between 1860 and 1900 demonstrated the importance of having the vote and exercising the vote. Once you lose control of that vote, then you have no real voice in government. You have no voice to select people who will protect you. You have no voice to select people who will enhance your position in a nation.
Well, and so Dr. Mitchell, essentially, are you saying that as long as Africans were able to participate in the politics of the South during that period shortly after the war up until the time that they were eliminated in 1890, that they had some influence, influence enough to, in a real sense, control legislation, at least deal with legislation.
That's right.
But once they were removed in 1890, and they will be removed until 1960, they no longer have any kind of influence, and segregation comes out.
They become victims.
Segregation is one of the great divisions of the...
Well, it's also the emotional stress still of the South. The South doesn't know how to deal with its northern industrialized counterpart. The North is becoming visibly more well-off economically than the South. And the South needs someone to scapegoat. So we see, again, these precocious laws and actions. Slavery gave automatic status to a free man. Any free man was better than a slave. After slavery, we see the beginnings of institutionalized racism, not just in the South, but certainly in the South. So status is accorded based upon race. The previous advantage that had been enjoyed in freedom was now acquainted to race. So we begin to see the concept of racism, the white superiority, based on nothing but race. You know.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Mitchell, over this last minute, let me thank you and to say how very, very appreciative we are to have you to come by.
It's always a pleasure to come on.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure to be a part of something that's very informative.
Yeah, but I think you just bring some excellent information to us, and what we've been able to do over the many years, as we've indicated, is to use this information and video cassettes and whatever, and to expose our young people to them, and we find that they are very, very interested in many of your statements, and especially you. I really wouldn't want to leave without saying something about the Fifth Jubilee Singers, the story of the Fifth Jubilee Singers.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Did.
And hopefully we'll do other programs and discuss other topics.
Okay, very good.
Because it's always a pleasure to be a part of Comments with Dr.
Okay,
Haynes.
I certainly appreciate that, and let me encourage others to then tune in next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. Appreciate it.